And the New York Times has uncovered new information about the raid into Michael Cohen, the president's former personal attorney. The Times says the FBI has a recording of Cohen and Mr. Trump discussing a payment to former Playboy model Karen McDougal. She claims she had an affair with Mr. Trump in 2006. One of the president's current attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, told the Times that the president did discuss payments with Cohen, but says the payment was never made. Giuliani says the president did nothing wrong. Mr. Cohen has been under investigation for his personal business dealings. Eugene Scott, he is a political reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome, Eugene. What do we know about this specific recording and how it was obtained?
Well, what we know is that it was obtained in part during a raid of Michael Cohen's offices by the FBI, a raid that President Trump previously criticized and denounced when he first heard about it. But we also know that this tape just includes a conversation between Cohen and Trump about possible payments to Karen McDougal, who previously confessed that she had an affair with Donald Trump. We know that Trump denied the affair. We know he's denied that there have been recordings. And now this is a situation where Trump is forced to consider the very likely possibility that Cohen is not only cooperating, but that he himself recorded these tapes of his conversations with the president.
And now, Giuliani argued that the recording shows the president did nothing wrong. What does he mean by that?
Well, what Giuliani is arguing is that the tapes do not prove that payments were made. It is not clear yet how much Giuliani knows about the tapes in terms of whether or not he's actually listened to them all himself. But what Trump has denied was that there actually were no payments because there was no affair. But what the tapes supposedly demonstrate is that there was an affair and that payment conversations actually were being had.
Now, this is coming out, of course, in an election year. The president previously denied the McDougal affair. So from a political standpoint, how damaging could this be?
I think when we're talking about an election year, we should focus on independent voters. Republicans have decided that they are going to ride the Trump train until the Trump train gets off the tracks. The reality is, though, that there are voters on the margins who make decisions based off of how they feel sometimes at the last minute over one or two issues. And it's not as much of the affair that could be problematic for the president, but the constant dishonesty and lying and inability to trust someone who not only in this situation, but in situations with Putin and national security and situations, quite frankly, with the economy and other issues, has left questions in many voters' minds about his integrity.
Sure. Eugene, I want to switch gears now for a moment. The White House says Vladimir Putin is being invited to Washington this fall for a second summit. And here's what the president had to say about that to CNBC.
We had a tremendous discussion on many things: terrorism, Syria, the Middle East overall, Iran. We talked about, as an example, nuclear proliferation. There's nothing more important than that. We had a tremendous meeting. I had a meeting that lasted for more than 2 hours. It wasn't always conciliatory in that meeting.
That hasn't come out. Did you?
No, but we discussed many of the points I just said. I mean, basically, that's what we discussed. We discussed lots of good things for both countries, frankly. But there are things that we can do for both countries that are very good.
So all that was about the first meeting, but one person unaware that a second meeting was in the works was the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats. What do you make of the fact that the United States top spy was blindsided by this and found out when it was announced on Twitter?
I think it speaks to the latest example of chaos, or at least not being on the same page. Many people in this administration actually are. The idea that Dan Coats was made aware of this meeting while in an interview with a journalist publicly, it's quite fascinating. I mean, these are conversations that you would think the top national security advisor would be privy to first and foremost, considering the ongoing concerns that American intelligence has with Russia, not just because of their involvement in the 2016 election, but ongoing involvement in future elections. It is just puts many people at loss of words, myself, but more importantly, those in the national security space.
I agree. It was just an amazing moment to see Dan Coats get the information along with all of us who are watching the interview. To put it in his words, it was pretty special. All right, so this I just want to play some of that. Let's listen.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the President has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the President's prerogative. If he had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way.
Of course, that was Dan Coats speaking about the first summit. Are you surprised about how candid Coats was about that summit and that he doesn't know what happened in the 2-hour meeting between the two world leaders?
I was surprised by how candid it was. I saw another journalist tweet that Dan Coats will go down as the first administration official to give an exit interview before being fired. And I think the fact that Trump today has communicated how upset he was with that interview verifies or confirms why people like me were surprised at how candid he was. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised, however, that he did not know what happened in that one-on-one meeting with Putin. That's deeply concerning, if not alarming, but I'm not surprised that President Trump was not transparent with his own national security advisor about that conversation. However, that is deeply problematic to people in the national security space and many voters who don't have as much confidence in Trump's ability to stand up for their interests before Putin. And that's the information we actually saw in the CBS poll that came out earlier this week. There's a lack of confidence that Trump will stand up to Putin, and the fact that the national security advisor doesn't even know what happened in that conversation days later does not encourage people to be more confident in Trump.
Yeah, we really did a deep dive into that poll yesterday, but I want to ask you what you think of the fact that this second meeting could fall right around the midterm election. Does that hurt Republicans' midterm message, or does it help them?
Well, the Democrats are going to work hard to make sure it hurts them. Whether it's going to actually land depends on what else is happening and how partisan and tribalistic this midterm election continues to be. But if somehow the message from Democrats can be that this is someone that you cannot trust, I think the independent voters, as well as Democrats who may not normally turn out for the midterms, will buy into that. As the CBS poll also mentioned, it's not going to hurt with Republican voters. About half of Republicans actually believe Putin's denial over U.S. intelligence, according to that CBS poll.
Right, absolutely. Now, meanwhile, the president today claimed on Twitter that farmers have been on a downward trend and the price of soybeans has been falling for years, showing that he's aware of tariff concerns. We looked it up, and the price of soybeans had been going up and down for the past 10 years, but have been consistently lower for the past 3 years. How big a gamble is a trade war with China and imposing tariffs on our allies going into midterm season?
It is a concern because one of the few things that the president has going for him overall is how he's doing with the economy. He had some higher approval ratings when you control economic things because of unemployment rates and how the stock market is doing as well. But if white working class voters or Midwestern voters or just traditionalist conservatives who did vote for Trump because they had economic concerns actually end up having economic concerns, that could lead them to sit the midterms out because they're not going to be voting for lawmakers who are going to push against Trump. Most Republicans going to seeking seats in the Congress are just on brand with the Trump train, including with issues related to tariffs and foreign trade. All
right. Now, the president also suggested in his interview with CNBC that he is ready to impose even more tariffs on China. What message would it send if Republicans considering legislation to rein in Trump's trade authority?
Well, it just is going to be a reminder that the Congress and the White House aren't on the same page when it comes to tariffs or foreign affairs and the long-term implications of that. And so it's really difficult to unite to push against legislation coming from Democrats that you think could be harmful to your voters when you can't get your own side on the same page. And whether or not they will be able to do that before November, based on how things are going right now, it's not looking likely. And I don't think voters will respond to that favorably.
All right, we'll see what happens. Eugene Scott, thank you for your insight.
Thanks for having me.